March 15th of 1781, on cold, spongy grounds out here in the damp air. Patriots, 4,400 deep, are standing strong in all kinds of different uniforms, and they're awaiting the enemy to approach. This place where I am walking right now is a battlefield known as Guilford Courthouse. We're going to bring you out here today with us, give you a brief overview of the battlefield and what you can expect to see. Let's get out there and get going. So we made our way out to Guilford Courthouse. We're going to come out here and see what this battlefield has to offer. I haven't spent too many days out here wandering around. I know a little bit about the battle itself, but probably not enough to really be any kind of an expert at it. So we're going to check this place out and see what it has to offer. So at this point that I'm standing at right now at the Visitor Center, we're standing roughly 200 yards behind where the first American lines were. And directly off in front there is where Cornwallis's men are actually forming up and coming down that road. And the North Carolinians, part of that militia fighting out here, actually see them coming, and they start to panic when the first shots ring out. Almost immediately, they turn and run back to the second line. It's a disastrous start for sure here at Guilford Courthouse. And of course, you know the battle, how it ends. It turns into pretty much a beating for the American forces out here in this field. So here's something interesting. We ran across the street here to see this memorial. And on the face of this memorial it says, Nathaniel Macon willed that his memorial should consist only of root stones. Here they are. That's pretty much it. This is right behind the Carolina lines here at the Guilford Courthouse. So I'm walking down a part of Monuments Row here, and there's a whole bunch of monuments that were placed out here. Looks like somebody took a shot at that one. All the way down here at Guilford Courthouse. We're going to take a look at each one of these a little bit closer. The first one we're looking at right here is to Captain James Moorhead of the 10th Regiment, North Carolina Continental Line. Now, it'd take me probably half a day or more just to get out here and film every single monument that's out here at Guilford Courthouse. We're not going to do that. We're going to talk about the battle a little bit and kind of show you the place here in this video. But I can say there's some pretty important stories out here under that basically represented by these monuments, including the one of the lady that you'll see here in the background as I'm passing by. And it said on the tablet itself that the lady rode her horse down from Maryland in order to nurse her son and take care of her kid here on this field. That's a pretty amazing story there. The reason why there's so many monuments out here, though, is because North Carolina decided that this was going to be the battlefield to represent all of their sons of the American Revolution. So they decided to start putting a whole bunch of monuments out here. They made this a bit of a tourist spot. And today you can come out here and walk the roughly 2.25 miles round trip if you want to, or take a driving tour and see a whole lot of this stuff by car. We're going to be on foot today. We're going to walk the 3 lines that the Continental Army was in and talk a little bit about the action there and move our way along as best we can so that this video doesn't turn into a 6-hour video. Right out in front of me here is what looks like, I guess, the grave of Major John Davies. That's pretty cool. See this right here on the field. So directly out front here we have a monument to Brigadier General Jethro Sumner. And Jethro Sumner was in charge of the 3rd North Carolina Continental Troops. So they placed it out here kind of right where the North Carolina militia was, or at least just in rear of where the militia was. So it's pretty neat to see this out here too. Definitely dedicating a piece of land, I guess you could say, to Jethro Sumner, hero of 76. Down here on this battlefield, there's a nice trail that you can take, but you have to cross some roads and all that good stuff, so kind of have to be careful getting around here. The driving trail is not that bad either. It takes you to all the major stopping points, and actually the farmstead where the British were forming their lines is not too far up the street behind me there also. So that's a pretty cool place to go see. And we're coming up on the monument right now that's dedicated to the 3 North Carolinians that ended up signing the Declaration of Independence. Hughes would be the only one that was actually involved here at Guilford Courthouse. But this is a pretty magnificent monument to take a look at. And it's actually kind of in a little cove or corner here of monuments, including this very large one over here. Now I'm about to pass the Nathaniel Greene monument right now, which is that gentleman there on horseback, if you will, dedicated to the officer Nathaniel Greene that was in charge of the forces out here in the Southern Campaign. He took over this campaign when Horatio Gates royally messed things up. And it was his planning ultimately that ended up creating a lot of victories here in the Southern Campaign and gave a lot of hope to the men that were fighting for these armies. Eventually this would lead to what would happen at Yorktown in Virginia. This is a pretty significant place for him, even though this is a defeat here in the state of North Carolina for the Patriots. So now we've just come from that line where the North Carolina militia are over there, and they've fallen back to the second line. And we're going to keep going down this route that we're on, an old historic route here. We're headed to the next line where the Continentals and the militia are located. And we'll talk a little bit about that history there. We'll see if we can't hit some of the more major points out here. Now, up until this point, things are working in the favor of Nathaniel Greene. He's had a lot of small victories. Kings Mountain has turned out to be something brilliant. Cowpens was one of the most sweeping victories here in the South for them. He's even had a victory over at Musgrove Mill, which we are covering in all these videos here for the Southern campaign. So up until this point, things are looking pretty decent, but they are outmatched here at Guilford Courthouse. And because of the turning and the running and the collapsing of the lines here, they really don't stand much of a chance. Now, on each side of the New Garden Road, about 150 yards away from that position that we were at, the North Carolinians were divided into essentially two brigades. They held the positions overlooking 3 muddy farm fields, and they were awaiting the advance of Cornwallis there in that position where we just came from. The veteran redcoats, however, as they were coming up over that hill, looked pretty imposing, with their red uniforms on, their bayonets shining, and the cannons rolling out, and artillery firing and blasting away. The North Carolinians stood there, took aim, fired. But eventually they were driven from that position almost immediately, and they started making their way back towards this second line here. Now, there's a neat story out here on this sign about Delaware soldiers that were found here. It says that in 1888, David Schenck, searching for battlefield artifacts, found the upturned bones of 3 unidentified soldiers on a farm north of the park. From buttons found in the grave supposedly marked USA, Schenck concluded that the deceased were American Continentals killed in action. The location of the soldiers' remains suggests that they were part of the Kirkwood's Delaware Company on the right flank of the first line. In the contrast to the first line's militia, the Delaware troops were seasoned professionals of equal caliber to the British regulars. The remains were reburied here under the grave marker commemorating their valor. So I'm assuming that the grave marker is that monument that we just went to not too long ago. That is pretty neat stuff right there. Actual patriots buried right there underneath the marker. So it's already become very apparent I'm going to have to come back to this place and plan a couple of days to be out here in this field. I'm standing in a position right now where if you turn left, you see monuments. If you turn right, you see monuments. There's monuments up on the hill, and all this stuff drives me crazy because I don't like passing up on an opportunity to catch a cool story or read a little something about things, and I don't have a whole lot of time right now out here at Guilford Courthouse because we're making our way back to Virginia as I speak. Yeah, this is pretty neat. This battlefield has a lot of places that I have yet to be standing, so definitely gonna have to come back and check this place out. And here in a minute, I'm gonna walk over to a monument that's on this field that, according to the park sign, says it's a spot that was supposedly marked for the death of Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart of the 2nd Battalion of Guards. So it's a commemoration of someone who fought for the British side. And during the hand-to-hand fighting, Captain John Smith of the 1st Maryland Regiment cut down Stewart with a heavy saber. Some accounts have the fact that they state that there's a fact that they found a saber inside of a hollowed-out log here in this position. The truth of the matter is, there probably wasn't, and this is definitely not the place where he was cut down. But it's more of a symbolic thing. And we're going to go over here and take a look at this real quick, as the hand-to-hand combat that happened here with the second line surely was something amazing, and definitely you can tell by the death that happened out here how deadly this combat was, even for an American Revolution fight. By comparison, they're very small fights compared to the American Civil War. And here it is. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart. See if you can see that right there. Pretty neat. I'm gonna flip this camera around and get a nice visual for you. Well, I'm at the Cavalry Monument up here at the top of the hill. You may or may not have been able to see that in the background of my video. And there's a couple of plates on this thing. It kind of tells an interesting story. One says, "To Peter Francisco, a giant in stature, might and courage, who slew in this engagement 11 of the enemy with his own broadsword, rendering himself thereby perhaps the most famous private soldier of the Revolutionary War." That's pretty interesting telling. And then on the other side it says, "To the Marquis of Brittany and Colonel William Washington, who with their North Carolina and Virginia cavalry charged and ran through and over the 2nd Queen's Guards in the valley below." I hope I pronounced that right. That's pretty interesting stuff here too. And I'll flip the camera around and let you take a look at what we've got here in the background at this monument, this cavalry monument. So here's some interesting information out here at the park. In this sign, they are talking about the company that was out here trying to put together this battlefield and to lay down monuments and things to dedicate what happened out here and to the soldiers that took their part out here in this battle. And it draws out a real interesting map here on the sign. And I'll turn the camera around so you can see this, but according to modern research, what they thought was the third line and the spot where the cavalry was probably was not. So we'll flip this around and we'll show you the map itself. So the information noted on this sign here, I'll point out some spots to you. The American first line, according to National Park information, is roughly in this location. The visitor center is right about here. The American second line is just forward of where we are right now. We're on this hill where they thought the cavalry was, because Schenck thought that the third line was off in that direction over there, which is what was indicated by the monuments that are placed in that location. But the park actually realized the third line is further behind, just in front of the courthouse area, and this is the movement of the cavalry around. So we're going to get over there to that third line and take a look at it when we make our way to that position. But we're going to continue on this trail looking at these monuments out here and bringing some more information. I can't wait to get back out here again and see this place with more time. So just like I said in my video that I'm going to put out there about Kings Mountain, I had an ancestor at Kings Mountain fighting from Rutherford County out there, and I still haven't fully researched the rest of the men that were fighting out there, because I could have had probably a couple of ancestors at that field, but I definitely had one. And here at this location, I had a couple. Henry Hensley was how his name was written, and when he died, he was buried as Hensley. He fought out here with Virginia. I also had a relative here with Colonel Washington's cavalry. So it's pretty interesting how all these men seem to come together, and whether or not they even knew that they were related to each other, I'm not sure, but they definitely lived in close proximity to each other at the end of their lives, and I'm sure they had a lot of stories to tell about the American Revolution. But unfortunately, the only thing I can find on any of them is pension letters showing that they drew pensions for being Revolutionary War veterans, and other documents that people have filed with their names on them to be part of the Daughters of the American Revolution and things like that. So it's a pretty interesting thing to be able to walk in a place like this, even a place where the Patriot forces were defeated, and know that your ancestors were out here at such a crazy time in our history. You know, they weren't sure this was going to work out. They did not technically have a country. They were fighting here for each other in this almost first version of a American Civil War, if you will, and fighting the crown as well, hoping that eventually they would be able to break away and have independence and become their own nation. This is roughly the location of the Continental's second line, directly out front here. And this would have been a wooded area out here at that time too. And according to the park information at this location, once that first line fled, the British soldiers would come up here and start a firefight, but could not keep their formations out here in the woods. And so what you had was separate clumps of men fighting in different smaller engagements throughout these woods, but the firefight was kept up so greatly here that it looked like the Continentals were actually winning at this location until the British were able to reform and push their way through this second line towards that third line, which is off in that direction, and we're about to head over to that direction now. So out here on this field we have another Civil War connection. Light Horse Harry Lee is actually fighting in this area against none other than Banastre Tarleton. And his battlefield ends up pushing like a half a mile off in that direction, away from where I am right now. But here's that monument I was telling you about, the Winston Monument. It's pretty unique, and I'll flip the camera around and slow motion it so you can see it a little bit better detail. So you can see that Joseph Winston monument in the background there. And in this location, Banastre Tarleton's men are actually fighting against Light Horse Harry Lee. And their men are actually pushing off about a half a mile in that direction behind me. for a separate engagement. But over here, Major Joseph Winston and Jesse Franklin are both buried out here. Jesse Franklin, at one point in time, was the governor of North Carolina. And I'll flip this around so we can show you their graves here on the battlefield. So as promised, we flipped this camera around, and here's Major Joseph Winston's grave and Jesse Franklin. And both of these men were fighting out here, majors of the Continental Line and Continental Militia. They were reburied here, however, in 1909, I think is what the sign said. So their headstones and everything were removed and moved over here to this portion of the battlefield where they have been for a long time now. Another thing to note, there was a Richard Taliaferro out here. He was part of this militia that was in this location, and Taliaferro might well have been the last patriot to be killed out here at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Now the position that I'm walking to right now is essentially the third line. That's what the park has it marked as. And this is where those Continentals are. These are the well-trained soldiers, smaller batch compared to the militia. But this is that last line of defense. This is basically where the fight is going to bring in the British regulars to. But by the time the British regulars get to this position, the fight is pretty much going to be done, because there's not much of a resistance going to be put up thanks to the terrible loss that's happening in front of them. So we'll flip this camera around, kind of show you the position here, and then talk about it a little bit. So we're walking out now towards the general vicinity of where the Guilford Courthouse and the surrounding public buildings would have been. Now, it's not like you would have seen during the American Civil War or any other time, really. They're small buildings. There's not that many people in the area. They're registering deeds and things like that. So this is a very small building, a very small location. And at this point in time, Greene has switched his plans from going on the attack to going on the defense. And he's chosen this location to be his ground. And it would have been roughly out in this area here. So the trail that I'm taking now is that actual third line trail that we were talking about. And we're going out towards that area now where the high ground is, where the Continentals would have been. And you want to talk about a devastating loss in the American Revolution. Out here at this field, the Patriots basically lost their artillery as they were withdrawing from the field. And this sign here talks about a little bit more information about it. And of course they have a couple of artillery pieces placed here on the high ground here on the third line trail. Two of those cannons were placed in the initial lines, and they were firing off at the British soldiers that were coming up, but eventually they would be lost, as well as the other two cannons out here. Pretty devastating for that army. Again, this is the position of the third line that we're talking about here. So Greene had ordered those cannons to be wheeled back and taken back to the lines. But as these men are hurrying off the fields, they're not concerned with artillery, they're just concerned with saving their own lives. So a heavy piece of artillery becomes very cumbersome for someone who's trying to run and hide. I'm standing out in front of one of the signs here at the third line, put in by the National Park, and it has a pretty good description of this fight. And here in a minute we'll read that description and talk about the action that happened right out here directly in front of me. So the descriptions here talks about the high ground overlooking the stream, and it stood the American third line, a mix of seasoned Continentals and new recruits. They waited tensely for the enemy, who had momentum after overrunning the first and second line. When the British guards emerged from the woods below, the fiercest fighting of the day began. Now that description pretty much sums it up. The Continentals have been waiting back here on this hill with the fight happening way out in front of them. So this isn't a small battlefield like Cowpen's battlefield. There's thousands of soldiers out here, not just a couple thousand facing each other. And these men are waiting for what should be some pretty well maneuvered fighting ahead of them. But what happens is those first two lines get overwhelmed and they collapse. So the Continentals are sitting up on this hill, and all down here below me is a stream that runs in this direction, and there's a little bridge that goes over the top of that stream here in just a minute. They can see those men coming across that stream and marching up through those fields, and you think that they would have the advantage, but they don't. And they put up a real hard fight here on this hill. And just as the left flank starts to become overwhelmed, William Washington and the cavalry come around from the right side and start slashing away, killing men by the score. It's pretty tough fight out here, but nonetheless, it really doesn't amount to much for the British. It was said that another costly victory like this, and they would lose the war. This was a very costly victory for the British. And for the Patriots, even though it was a loss, it would eventually turn into the campaign that moves its way up north, and we're going to end up talking about Yorktown here pretty soon and what happened up there. So this is an amazing battlefield, and I've had a lot of fun walking around out here and bringing some of it to you, and I hope you enjoyed it as we made our way up to Guilford Courthouse from our trip down in Kings Mountain and Cowpens. Well, you really can't get much better than this. Traveling around out here in these battlefields in North Carolina and South Carolina, checking out the Liberty Trail itself and some of the lands that not only the local people have saved, but the American Battlefield Trust have also saved. This is a beautiful country for sure, a lot of good history out here, and so many places to visit. If you get the chance, come down here to South Carolina, North Carolina. Check out these Revolutionary War battlefields this year. The 250th, you know, it's a pretty big deal. Well, I hope to see you around out there on those fields, and you guys keep safe. Till next time, this is History with Waffles.
On March 15th in 81, beneath Carolina sky, at Guilford Courthouse field of pine, where the winter grass lay dry, Lord Cornwallis marched his men, ready, willing, and strong. Met General Greene with double ranks, prepared to prove him wrong. Greene remembered Morgan's stand at Cowpens months before. He formed 3 lines of sturdy souls along the Salisbury Road. North Carolina militia first, then Virginians in line, Continentals in the rear, his sharp and steady spine. 3 lines deep in the Carolina clay bend, but don't break, let the redcoats pay. Fire and fall back through the smoke and flame, wear 'em down slow in freedom's name. At 1:30, the drums rolled on, the British closed the space. At 150 yards, the rebels loosed their blades. The Tar Heel boys fired one more round, then faded through the trees, leaving packs and broken ground among the whispering leaves. 400 yards behind them stood Virginia's second wall. Guards and Highland regiments answered to the call. They fought on left and fought on right, on center held the fray, till pressed by steel on every side, they too were pushed away. 3 lines deep in the Carolina clay, bend but don't break, let the redcoats pay. Step by step through blood and flame, stand like oak in freedom's name. The 33rd struck Maryland hard, but staggered back in pain. The Second Guards turned Maryland's right in fury and in strain. Then William Washington's dragoons came thundering through the smoke, with 1st Maryland beside them, and the British center broke. Greene withdrew in measured step, his army still alive, while Cornwallis counted cost, too broken to survive. 3 lines deep in the Carolina clay, victory's price was dearly paid. Though the field was left in British hand, their strength was spent upon that stand. 3 lines deep and the tale rolls on from Guilford's field to a brighter dawn. For the road to Yorktown had begun that day when Greene stood firm, then slipped away. Back to Wilmington to rest and mend, the north where empire's rule would end. From Carolina's battered ground came freedom's long, unyielding sound.